The Coast Guard assumed they were dealing with an old man clinging to a relic of the past. But when 6 Navy destroyers steamed into Windermere Bay an hour later, cutting through the fog like steel ghosts, it became clear this wasn't just about a boat. It was about respect, memory, and the way the sea remembers its own. The man in question was Thomas Galloway, a retired Navy engineer who had lived in Windermere Cove for nearly 40 years. He wasn't the kind of person people noticed. Every morning, he walked the same path down to the docks, nodded to joggers, tipped his cap to the baristas at the Wharf Cafe, and greeted the teens who spent summers cleaning fish and renting kayaks. He didn't speak much, but his presence was steady. His boat, the Seraphine, was docked in Slip 22 for as long as anyone could remember. Built from teak and mahogany, with polished brass rails and hand-tied rigging, she was more sculpture than vessel. Outsiders called her outdated. Locals knew better. Thomas had built her himself after retiring from active duty and losing his wife within the same painful year. She wasn't just a boat. She was how he held on. That morning, the bay was quiet. Gulls circled. The breeze was soft. Thomas had planned to take Seraphine out for her annual shakedown sail before hosting his summer sailing course for local youth. For 15 years, he'd volunteered to teach kids the basics of navigation, the difference between knowing a knot and trusting one, and what it meant to respect the ocean. His grandson, Caleb, had helped load crates the night before. All was ready. As Thomas began to untie the mooring lines, a Coast Guard SUV rolled onto the marina lot. A young officer stepped out and approached with a clipboard. He was respectful, if stiff. He asked for registration, insurance, and inspection documents. Thomas, always prepared, handed him a leather folder containing everything. The officer skimmed it, frowned, and said new compliance regulations required digital records. Thomas calmly noted that Seraphine was grandfathered in under existing maritime heritage clauses and had passed her physical inspection just 3 months prior. The officer didn't seem interested. Minutes later, a patrol boat pulled in with 2 more officers. They boarded without invitation. No words of warning, no collaborative tone. Just a cold inspection of the vessel's every crevice, as if they expected to find contraband tucked beneath coiled rope. Thomas stood to the side, calm but clenched. When they announced the boat would be taken in for a safety hold, he asked where, on what grounds. No one answered. Seraphine's engine groaned to life as she pulled away without her owner. The sound of her departure was hollow. The ropes, now loose in Thomas's hands, hung like unanswered questions. He didn't speak. He didn't move. But the look in his eyes changed something in the air. By mid-morning, a small crowd had gathered. A teen recorded a short clip of Thomas sitting silently on the dock and uploaded it with the caption, "Old vet loses his boat." It was vague, but it sparked something. That clip was shared, then reshared. It bounced through veteran forums, maritime pages, and finally landed in a Navy alumni group chat. Caleb arrived at the dock an hour later, still in his Naval Academy cadet jacket. He didn't speak at first, just sat beside his grandfather, whose logbook remained open but unwritten on his knee. When Caleb heard what happened, he pulled out his phone and made a call. Then another. Then another. The Coast Guard issued a brief online statement about routine inspections and compliance. They made no mention of Thomas or the Seraphine. But the internet had already started doing what institutions feared most, remembering. Photos emerged of the Seraphine during emergency rescues, youth programs, storm responses. People began asking why such a vessel would be seized. And then the fog rolled in. It came fast and low, blanketing Windermere Bay in a hush. The horn of a distant ship echoed 3 long blasts. Every Navy man knew that call. Thomas stood. Caleb followed. From the fog, silhouettes emerged. Not yachts. Not fishing boats. Larger. Sharper. Destroyers. 6 Navy ships formed a half-circle around the marina. Silent. Flags lowered to half-mast. On the lead vessel, an admiral in dress whites stood with his hands behind his back. Without fanfare, a small launch carried 2 officers to the dock. One held a folded flag, the other a plaque. They walked straight to Thomas. The admiral saluted. Thomas returned it. He didn't speak until the admiral finished recounting his heroics from a 1983 engine room fire aboard the USS Adams. How Thomas had crawled through smoke and chemical fumes to manually shut a valve, saving 27 crewmen. How he never accepted the citation. How he asked that it be given instead to the families of those lost in other missions. The crowd, silent until now, began to shift. Not away, but forward. Closer. People who once passed Thomas without a word now saw him. Not just as a quiet man with an old boat, but as living history. The admiral handed him the plaque. On it was mounted a brass plate from the USS Adams. It read, Chief Engineer Thomas Galloway, courage without witness. Honor without applause. Thomas took it. Then the flag. His fingers lingered on the cloth. The sailors aboard the ships saluted as one. The fog began to lift. Sunlight broke through. By dusk, the ships had gone. No statement. No press. Just presence. 2 days later, the Seraphine was returned. Damaged. The Coast Guard officer who delivered her didn't speak. He didn't need to. The town had already spoken in his place. A local boatwright offered to restore her. Veterans offered funds. High schoolers showed up to help sand the deck. Within a month, she was seaworthy again. Not perfect, but proud. And from that summer on, every young sailor who trained under Thomas knew the name Galloway not just as a story, but as a standard. The sea had remembered. And so had the nation.